We're really happy to have you here with us today. I'm Dr. Patty Slatum. I'm a visiting scholar at GSA. And before we begin our program today, I'd like to provide you with just a few logistical considerations. Please keep your audio on mute during the event and submit your questions for the panelists via the Zoom chat. We may have some time at the end for questions asked directly, but during the initial question and answer part that we'll be doing with the panelists, if you could keep your audio on mute, that would be great. This career conversation is being recorded and it's going to be available after the event on the GSA website. And I'm joined today by co-moderator, Dr. Patricia Hine. She's the founding director of the Marymount Center for Optimal Aging at Marymount University. And Patricia and I are members of the GSA Career Conversations Workgroup that plans these career conversations. And these conversations are designed to provide a forum for an exchange of ideas about issues and strategies to help us all build successful careers in gerontology. So today's topic is work-life balance. We think about this topic and we wonder if balance is even the right word, but it's a holy grail that many of us seek. Does it exist? How do we achieve it? Our panel of GSA members today will share how they have approached this ongoing challenge and strategies that they've used in their careers and family lives. We encourage questions from the audience, so please feel free to share your questions in the chat. And I'm going to turn it over to Patricia to open up our career conversation.
Thank you so much, Patty. And I couldn't start without acknowledging all the great contributions that you have been doing to this program with your innovations and your passion. And so we have another outstanding program thanks to your leadership and your commitment. So by saying that, today's career conversation, I would like to introduce our wonderful panelists. We are delighted to have a distinguished group of GSA members who share their perspective on setting boundaries and balancing work-life responsibilities, which is such an important topic for us, and also for us to keep mentoring and keep supporting the career development of our colleagues. First, I will welcome Dr. Feika Zanghani, and I apologize if I didn't say your name quite right. My lips, sometimes they don't go to the right place, but I try to make an effort. So Dr. Zanghani or Zanjani?
Zanjani.
Zanjani. Is an associate professor of gerontology from the College of Health Professions at Virginia Commonwealth University, so we are neighbors. Next, I would like to welcome Dr. Stephen Shuman, Professor and Director of Oral Health Services for Older Adults Programs. He's at the School of Dentistry at the University of Minnesota. Welcome. And we are also pleased to have joining us Dr. Elsa Strotmeyer, Associate Professor of Epidemiology, School of Public Health at the University of Pittsburgh. Now, Patty, I will pass the microphone to you. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Patricia, for introducing everyone. We're delighted to have you all here. And each of our panelists have very diverse career journeys and experiences balancing multiple responsibilities. We had a nice chat about that before we all jumped into this conversation today. And we look forward to learning from each of you in this conversation. And now we're going to start with some questions for the panelists. And our first question that that our committee had was, what does work-life balance really mean, and is balance achievable? And we'll start maybe with you, Dr. Zanjani.
Thanks, Patty. I've been thinking about this question. So I've been thinking about the thanks for the question. So everybody, I'm Feika Zanghani. Nice to see you all here. Really excited about this topic. This has been a topic probably we've been dealing with since the beginning of time, right? How to balance everything. And my short and quick answer to that is yes, but it's a dynamic fight. It's a constant one. So I guess I should tell you a little bit about me. So I have two children. I have a 10-year-old and I have a 12-year-old. They just started 5th grade and 7th grade this week. And we were just talking about how life happens. I have a sick appointment after this because my son called me from middle school and said he wasn't feeling well. So we're going to take care of this and figure this out, right? It's all about balance. And I have, my mother also lives with me. So I'm one of those Sandwich generations that you hear about. So my 65-year-old mother lives with me. She lives with me on and off, but since COVID, she's lived with me the whole time. So for the space in Virginia here, right, it gives her a little bit more space than urban New Jersey. So I live it. We've been living it. I think we all live it. And I think my answer to that is that it's dynamic and it's very intentional. I think you have to decide that you want some kind of balance, and you have to decide what kind of balance that is. And for me, that meant to always make room for both. I remember before I even had children, I was part of this work group, a women's empowerment academic work group, and we had to imagine ourselves. And I said I wanted it all, but by having it all, that meant I decided I wasn't going to cook. I don't cook. I decided I couldn't be, there was things that you have to decide, right? And there was things that I decided I couldn't do. I couldn't cook. I couldn't clean. I mean, these are things I had to let go, and I was okay letting go because I wanted the kids and I wanted the academic career and I wanted the marriage, right? And I wanted to be healthy. So I did pick health over cooking and cleaning. So exercise was one of the things that I picked. But I think it's very intentional and it's dynamic. These things can change. Maybe I'll pick up cooking later on when my kids go to college, when they don't have to eat what I make. But I think that balance has always been there. The balance was before the kids were even here, when I was with my mother, and I have a brother that's 14 years younger than me. So it's like the balance has always been there. And I think I've always made family a priority. And because I've had that, it's always been a constant, because I made it a constant issue. I think I've made it achievable. I don't know if my kids would say the same, but I feel like this is the best I can do. But I did tell him before I gave him some food that I'm going to be on meetings. So if you need me, you're going to have to wait till after. So we're all making those compromises. And COVID was a whole nother ballgame. It just threw everything up in the air. And I think we all figured out how to make that work. Everybody's alive, so I'm going to consider it success. I'll let one of my panelists answer.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think some of the things that you said, Feika, really resonate with thinking about this as dynamic, and that this balance isn't something you just achieve and it's done and you did it. It's going to be a constant negotiation. And that means reflection and thinking and reassessing where things are and being willing to do that and knowing that some things you'll need to let go of. Do you have something that you'd like to add to that, Dr. Strotmeyer?
Yes, well, first of all, I could pretty much say exactly the same thing. So I won't say everything that was just said, but I think a lot of what was just said resonated with me completely. I think balance is kind of a misnomer. It's more about deciding what pieces of your life are important to you, and then how do you fit those into your life. So I don't really call it balance. I call it, just being successful at incorporating what's important to me. My kids are now both teens. I have a middle schooler who also has a sick appointment later today. And I have a high schooler, and I have a grant deadline today for 5 p.m. and a sick child appointment at 4:30. And that's, just how the life works. And so I had to tell the grants admin that you'll get it at 4 and I'm not making any other changes. And so it's just, that's the way life is. And you just have to be sort of unapologetic about it. I also have valued family highly in my life. I've made choices about where to work, not only related to where I thought I could be successful at work, but where family was close by. So that's been a real key driving component. I just feel like if that's important to you and you're not going to be happy if you don't have your family around, then don't make decisions where your family won't be around. And so that's similar to what was just said. It has been a driving decision maker with my career as well. My kids' grandparents were always involved in their care and still have been.
Great. It's funny how parallels come between all of us as gerontologists, scientists that are trying to keep many things in order, but remembering what our priorities are and acting on those things. And sometimes it means decisions that of where we live or what work we do or what school our kids go to all have to be influenced by this priority list that we have. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Dr. Shuman, in your experience, what might you add to this conversation?
Yeah. Well, I guess I can serve as the historian here, since
we need one.
Right. Well, and maybe that's good. I mean, my family, of course, first laughed when they heard I'd been invited to talk about this because they didn't necessarily think I was always the best example, but that's probably a good thing to acknowledge too, because I can now look back and see some things I did that I wished I had done differently, in terms of prioritizing things. I think Elsa's comment that word balance is sort of hard to achieve, and at least for my wife and my family and me, it really is kind of a give and take, and at any given time, one person needs a little more time for work, and the other one hopefully can step in and do a little more, and it goes back and forth. So I've been married to a physician, internist, geriatrician, palliative care doc for 41 years. We have two grown kids, a 33-year-old engineer and a 29-year-old band teacher. And we had moved to Minnesota from back east. I mean, we both met and our families were in Philadelphia, so we didn't have a lot of support system beyond us and whatever friends that we might have made, and most of our friends were work friends. So I think there, when you look at that whole situation, first of all, I want to make a point that this is an issue for men too, even though I'm not sure in scanning through, we have that many here. I can think of specific situations where I felt uncomfortable leaving work to go get the kids at daycare because I felt there was an expectation, certain expectations of work that I be there for a certain meeting or whatever. And in looking back, though, I'd say in general, we did seem to figure it out okay. But it is, no one should think it's necessarily easy. And I think there are going to be some disagreements from time to time, at least that we had and making some accommodations. And so one of my tips, which comes later, of course, is to hopefully pick the right partner who's willing to work with you on those things.
Excellent. We can think of this as a team sport. I like that. And also just the notion that this isn't an issue only for certain groups of faculty or certain gerontologists. This is really something that is true for all. And the issues may be different of what people are balancing or the issues or priorities that they want to make, but we're all making them. And that's just important to acknowledge. Men, women, all of us are in this boat together. And I'd love to hear some of the tips that you all have for managing these work-life responsibilities, things you've learned in your journey that might help others that are in this journey too. And maybe we can start this time with you, Dr. Strotmeyer.
Sure. And so I think, it's important to recognize that even though, many of us in academia are workaholics, there are only 24 hours in each day of your life. And so one of the things that I believe is that you block out certain time for the things that are important to you and you try to stick to that. And you can't always do it depending on what's going on, like the example I gave you at my day today. But I pulled this out because I read this, as a young mom and still liked it a lot, but it's hard to see, but it's, I know how she does it. And she talks about, Laura Vanderkam talks about how you only have a set amount of time. So if you want to fit things in, it's your responsibility to fit those things in. And so I really do plan my days pretty carefully. The other thing I do, and again, as was mentioned already, COVID-19 really completely blew apart everybody's systems. But I have an ex-husband, though he and I are quite close. He's also an epidemiologist. Just because of our jobs that we have, I have more work later in the day because I do a lot of collaboration with the West Coast, and he has more work earlier in the day because he collaborates with surgeons who do research in the morning. So basically, I handle all the morning kid activities and he handles all the afternoon kid activities. So it's helpful if you have a partner where you have to just split up what people are doing. You can't always all be there all the time. I mentioned that my kids' grandparents were very involved in their care. And so, not only are dad and I splitting things up, but, grandparents are too. And I also had less now so that they're older, but I had, childcare support for when they were younger, either in the form of, daycare or, also nannies. And so it's just, you need a whole team of people. And so don't expect that you're going to be able to do everything yourself. And so if you get maybe 4 to 5 people working on it, then you might be able to do it. But especially if you have kids, you need to try to, get a big group involved,
Dr. Shuman, would you like to add some tips that you have come across?
Well, I think, we're all probably talking about the same things, or have found. Certainly communication is really important, and openness about that. I mean, as much as I didn't always want to hear my wife say, hey, I need this time, which normally is maybe, my day to pick up the kids or whatever. But I've got something important that I've got to do. And so we can hopefully proactively sort of solve those things. And so, and I felt comfortable talking to her too. So I think just establishing that openness of communication is really critical. And then, certainly setting those boundaries. I mean, I think we sort of mutually decided that kids were always a top priority. We weren't going to sacrifice not being at important events or being there for our kids when we needed to be. I think beyond that, it was sort of up for grabs, how we figured stuff out, but we never wanted to look back and feel like we regretted missing something important in our kids' lives.
That is definitely, the communication part is really important. And I know I used to do a bit of self-monitoring as sort of a tip out there I'll throw out, where I kept a spreadsheet each week. I wrote my major blocks of time of how I was spending it, and I added them up and I could tell when things were really awry. And I think it came from starting it as in a job before academics where I had to have billable hours. And so I got to kind of accounting my time, but then really using it to look at, and sometimes things got out of control pretty quick. I was able to tell, and I was able to start doing the pruning that needed to happen to keep the priorities, like you said, of your family in the right perspective. I just had to do some very intentional self-monitoring on that. And I'm curious from you, Dr. Zanjani, what have been your tips for management?
It's so funny you mentioned the schedule. So, funny story. So mommy guilt exists. If anybody experiences it, it's not just you. And I also think teamwork is essential. So daycare workers were my friends. They were my supporters. Teachers are my supporters. Like, these aren't just these are people that help me try to attempt to keep balance. So when I had my kids in daycare and I was paying more in daycare than I was in my mortgage, because I had 2 kids 20 months apart. So it was very intense. But that's what you do happens, right? When you delay childbirth, you just kind of go for it, which some of you may be experiencing. But that schedule, so just to make sure that I was okay with daycare, I tried to make sure that I had more hours with my children than the daycare workers. I would calculate and I tried to figure out if sleeping time counted. And I was like, yes, it counts. Monitoring them all night counts. And I would just make sure that didn't tip. And if it tipped, then I knew I needed to change. It was the only way that I could justify daycare when nobody in my family could understand the daycare, right? At 3 months, I was like, look, I have more hours with them. It's okay, right? That was the way I kept going. But I hear everything that you guys are saying. Teamwork is essential. Friends, family, colleagues. I mean, I said, I have my mother here, but she also provides support at the same time for my children. I had her come early on before she needed me to support me through this time. So my son, he was in daycare at 3 months, but my daughter was an October baby. And somebody told me, do not put them in daycare at 3 months. She'll be sick for the next year. So I was really nice to my mother and I had her come and stay with me, and she stayed with me till my daughter was 8 months. So I could send her in the summer instead of the winter. So those negotiations happens. I definitely did those kind of things. The one thing that I did early on, so friends, family, colleagues, they're all part of my care team. Like I utilize them all, get over the guilt really fast. But the one thing I did, and the communication is really important, like having that schedule. But the one thing that I did very early on was being prepared for deadlines and things. I had this, so I mentioned I had a brother that was 14 years younger than me. And the reason that I was worried about him is that I lost my father during my dissertation. And because he was sick all through grad school. So I had this thing where if I had something due, I had to have it ready 2 weeks beforehand because I didn't know when I would be called. And that strategy, even though I don't always make the 2-week deadline, that strategy has helped me walk away from things and be like, it's okay, I'm prepared, and to serve and to support. And it's very hard and it's stressful, especially if you need that time crunch to get things done. But creating that time crunch for the 2-week prep is utilize that energy instead of the actual deadline. If it was the week of an event and I didn't have something ready, I would get anxious at that point because I didn't know who would be calling me. So I practiced the strategy very early on, and it actually really worked well with my mentors as well. They seem to need 2 weeks to get things done. So I followed the 2-week pattern, and that 2-week block really helps me along. Doesn't mean I'm always prepared, but it's definitely a philosophy I utilize. Now that doesn't mean that everybody else works, as I said, like grants are due. My OSP officers like to work at the last hour. I'm not sure why, when I give them their week that they need, why they can't give me the time to reply, but I've now noticed to keep my day available during deadline day because I know they're going to be emailing me. But that prepared, like being always ready for an emergency, while it can be anxiety provoking, it really helps you deal with the emergency so you don't have to deal with that academic stress or that work stress. It helps, facilitates you being able to walk away when you really have to. So try the 2-week thing. It really works well for me.
That's some great advice. And I think it's nice to hear these different management strategies that you all have used. And I know we've been getting a lot of questions in the chat, so I'm going to turn it over to Patricia to pose a couple of those, and then we'll continue on. Okay.
Yeah,
so thank you, Patricia.
One more questions too. So we have a good questions from Kathy. They're all great, but starting by the order. So Kathy Gale, she asked, how the experiences that our panelists, they have about balancing work, life influence, and how your work how do you work with others? So because now you have to also balance the expectations with your colleagues, with your peers. So she said about direct reports, research partners, and other examples.
Yeah, would one of you like to offer some response to that question?
Yeah, I would. I mean, first of all, I have found it incredibly helpful to share my difficult decisions or those struggles that we've had with the people I work with, because I often find that not only are they dealing with the same difficulties, but I think they appreciate knowing that if I happen to be in a position of a supervisor for them, that I understand and that I've been through this, and I've told them some of the stories of the situations I've been through. I've also told people about being a young faculty member on tenure track and feeling pressured to stay at a meeting, which was a grant planning meeting, because I really felt I didn't want the senior faculty to think I wasn't as committed. And as a result of staying at that meeting late and not leaving enough time to go get my kids at daycare by 6 o'clock, I got into a fender bender in the parking ramp, you know, because I just didn't allow enough time. And that's one of those things I look back on and realize I should have just made my needs clearer and known to the folks at that meeting. Look, I've got to leave at a certain time. And I think that sharing those you know, those situations, those experiences, those stories, at least for me, I think I sort of feel like it's helped humanize me to the folks I work with. And also, by the way, to understand that guys go through this too.
Absolutely, very good point. And have you all, either Dr. Zanjani, Dr. Strotmeyer, had thoughts on the experiences with working with your colleagues when maybe the expectations are different, or their needs and your needs are not, we're not able to, or you're having conflict in that arena?
Well, I mean, I can tell about my experience. I mean, I would say, you know, you don't choose a place to work that you don't think is going to respect those kinds of things. So I think that that's a big piece too, that you have some agency here. And so, you know, the department that I'm in has been chaired for almost the entire time I've been there by successful academic women with children. You know, my mentors have had, you know, successful people with children. So you kind of, if your early career, pick someone who can mentor you in these areas as well. So, you know, don't work with a mentor that you've heard from many others is not going to respect that. And so you have some choice. I know it doesn't always feel like it when you're early career, but you have a choice about who you work with. And so, especially because I've been in research, I choose to work with people who respect the way I want to work. And so I have chose not to collaborate with some people sometimes who don't feel that that way of living isn't important. And so that's the great thing about research, is you get to decide sometimes who you're working with.
I completely agree with that. I think during all my interviews and during all job interviews, I've indicated to them that I have a family, and I test the waters with that information. I have a family, I have a mother, I have a sick brother or sister, like just to let them know what kind of, you know, life I'm dealing with. So you kind of lay that out there, see how they take it. If they can take it and relate, then you know there's some synergy there, right? And I was thinking right now, my colleagues that I work with all have children probably around the same age, and there's just understanding there amongst each other. And I remember when I can't remember when I graduated, in the early 2000s, somebody got married, and the administration was like, whoa, you guys are a different cohort. And then somebody had a baby, and then they were like, whoa. And, you know, I had mentors that didn't have children, and we're like, they just don't get it. And then now fortunately, I think now in academics, most people seem to have children. I don't know, there's many people that aren't. And the people, there's a generational shift there. I remember feeling lucky to live in the same city as my husband. There was a generation where they had to live apart and find different jobs. And I was always like, oh, I'm so happy that we could find a job in the same location. So it was, the struggles have been long and they've been dynamic, but I think laying it all out there, I think has really helped, and conversing about it and communicating about it, especially with the people that you rely on at work, adjust things. I read a book, I know there's some critics out there for the book Lean In, but some of the things that were important to me was that she was a ground baker, right? A CEO that was pregnant, that was going to have babies, and all of a sudden different conversations happened, right? Like, where is the bathroom? Where is the facility, daycare? Where is the parking for pregnant people, right? These are, and because I read how she was willing to push the button on family life balance, I was like, okay, that's what I do. So I lean in and I'm like, don't have meetings before 9 a.m. or after 4 p.m. Then you're excluding people with children, school responsibilities, right? Do things in the middle. I think people forget that they're being inclusive at work by not thinking of all the responsibilities that people have. So I think pushing the button, communicating at work, being open about those kind of responsibilities, I think is really important.
That's very nice. Thank you so much. I also would like to add, like for the early career, many times this selection of peers or mentors or colleagues to work might not be available to them because they're going to be being evaluated about how their interpersonal skills, how they're managing those different colleagues and different collaborators. And so I'd like to add that if you feel that pressure, just make sure to disclosure. Like if you have some family priorities that needs to take place, don't feel like you cannot tell your mentors or the professionals you are working because they're more senior and they might judge you. Actually, you might be impressed that people might even step up to be more helpful. So really disclosing and having everyone understand that you are there, you want to do the work, you want to be that wonderful colleague, but then you have some other priorities, events that needs your attention. And so you just have to feel comfortable in being open and let people know that you need some help. Yes.
No, I think what you've all just said, and Feika and you, Patty, very important. And the bottom line to me is if you tell people these things, coworkers, colleagues, and they're not willing to listen or understand, then I think you have to decide if that's the best place for you to be. Because you do, your goal is to succeed in all of those things, and there's no reason you can't. You should be able to succeed at work. You should be able to succeed as a caring family member, friend, and to people. And if somebody or some organization is standing in your way, then I think you need to re-examine that particular career choice. And I think that's a fact of life now. I think every employer that I know and folks I work with are very aware of that. And I know I certainly am. And when someone is trying to balance those things, I'd rather hang on to a great person as a colleague, knowing that they're just going through a difficulty with that, than to create a situation where they want to leave.
That's correct. Yeah. Thank you so much. So in some of the questions from our chat, again, they are so great. So at this time, I would like to ask Jamie Spicer. Do you feel okay to ask your questions, to be a little interactive as well?
Yeah, sure. So I'm interested in talking about traveling for work. I have a young daughter and I'm pregnant, and I always just feel so guilty having to leave. And I'm a statistician who works in aging. So, there's the aging conferences, the statistics, and, how do I pick which ones to go to? And I don't want to be away, once a month. So I'm wondering if you can kind of share how you've made decisions about attending conferences or meetings, or how you've managed to kind of be okay when you are traveling.
I mean, I think that's a great point, and it's especially salient now because what's happening is we were all on Zoom, so you didn't have to make those choices in the last few years. And in some ways that was really great for those of us who have a lot of other competing demands. But we know that this year it probably looks, for it's good and bad, a little different. Well, I can tell you, I still struggle with that. When the kids were younger, I would prioritize key meetings that I wanted to attend and then line up support for those meetings. I typically did not travel with my children. I have a one-way strategy that I use is I try to be 100% wherever I am. I found that I couldn't do that really when I was at a meeting and to be there all day long. And so usually I would have grandparents involved in care or someone come for care in the house when I traveled. And I would just decided to go to less meetings. I mean, I just went to ones that were really important to me. I still am making those decisions. Now that the kids are starting back the activities, I decided I didn't want to miss the Festival of the Bands that my son is in a few weeks to go to the American Society for Bone and Mineral Research. So I just made that decision already for myself. I'm still making those decisions. So I just do it based on, whether I feel comfortable not being there during that point of time and if I have childcare coverage for it. And if, get somebody else to present if you want your work to be published there. Most conferences allow that. And, I always allow my trainees to do that. I'll offer to present for them. If they can't travel, sometimes you can still submit things and have another co-author present. So those are strategies that I've used.
That's great. Thank you so much. Wonderful. And also we have some good comments here about some advice that comes from Linis, Chen, and Duboro. So about how to delegate some responsibilities for your own to take over control of your personal life. So she said that sometimes feel like doing something, but because you don't tell someone that you need help, and sometimes because you don't want to let it go, or you have more control of a task, how you can overcome that and be able still to manage your personal life, have the balance. And Lenny, let me know if I made justice to your comment.
That was fine, thank you.
Okay.
I think that's one where the communication, you just have to realize that people can't read your mind. I know my wife can't read my mind and I can't read hers. And so, the other thing is, I think just trying to sort of have your radar up and look at body language and look at, there are days when she comes home and I can see she's frustrated and she's unhappy or something maybe didn't go so well. She's quieter or whatever. And I think trying to sort of read that a little bit and volunteer to, it turns out somebody said they decided not to cook. I actually am the cook in the family. I don't know when that happened, but that's one way I can help. So I do think it's just, delegating responsibilities. It's again, to me, not delegating so much as negotiating, like, hey, I'm having trouble right now, or I need time for this. Could you help do that?
I think at some point I also realized that other people might not do things exactly the same way that I did them, but we could get good outcomes anyway. And that I could let some of that control go and it was going to be okay. I mean, as a parent, I don't know, early on, I felt like there was just, everything had to be done in a way that I had laid out, and it was all, and that can become very intense. And over time, I learned that there are other adults in my children's lives that can do things for them. And sometimes it's even better, right? And that I didn't have to control every minute. But this is something that we have to constantly be surveilling in our environment, about using the resources around us and being that resource for others too.
And I don't think you have to pick, either you don't do it or you do it. You could do a little piece of it, so maybe you can't cook dinner every night, but maybe like on the weekends, I make sure I cook dinner Saturdays, so I mean, you can compromise on things and just do the things that are most important to you. You don't have to, but I echo, what was said earlier, anything you can outsource, childcare, cooking, cleaning, anything that is not of the highest importance to you and you don't enjoy as much as other things, you just pick the things that you want to do the most, you do those, and then somebody else who's better at the other ones can do those.
Well, I just wanted to add a little comment, and that I'm sort of reading between the lines of that question from Lanus, and that is that, I think just sort of looking at this group of people, recognizing that we're all sort of professionals and we're probably self-selected to be concerned about work and, and to be, dare I say it, workaholics, and sort of recognizing that's not a good thing. I mean, that's one thing that's been helpful for my family to point out to me is, hey, that's, that whatever it is you're worried about right now at work isn't maybe as big a deal as you think. And so, I think that's kind of what gets into that control thing too, where you sort of feel like you have to do it all. But I think as Elsa just said, you don't. And there are certainly things you can probably offload. I'm amazed at how many great sort of semi-prepared foods there are in the store that take you very little time to serve, a hot meal, but somebody else has done a lot of the work. And we just sort of,
if it bothers you, like for me, bake sales always bugged me. Like I never had time to bake. So I would go to the bakery, get something and just put it on my own plate. You know what? Nobody's going to know. So you can sort of cheat. If there's something that really bugs you like that, like you just don't want people knowing you're not doing it, just don't tell them, None of the moms need to know that the election bake sale things came from the bakery down the street and not me,
Yeah, that's a good point. Also for you, Dr. Strotmeyer, the question is if you could share more how you were able to live near your family and have the balance and be able to advance in your career. And I can say from my own experience of being a mentor, I have some mentees that they decided to be caregivers because that was important for them, but they really hurt their career. And so they couldn't, have success in obtaining those R1s and getting that grantsmanship in the level that they deserve because now they limit their career perspective. So how we can still have a very fulfilling career.
Yeah. I mean, what I always tell my mentees is if you have family considerations that are important, there's lots of good work all around the country. You make that decision first and then try to find the work. And so I've done that throughout my career, even to graduate school. I chose a graduate school location that was fairly close to my family. I ended up getting married after graduate school and stayed at the University of Pittsburgh because my in-laws were here and they were going to be involved in childcare. And I just decided that the family was really important to me. You can still work lots of great places, I mean, maybe if you live in like rural Appalachia without a lot of places around, that's more challenging. But you can be kind of in the same geographic type region often, so that family is closer. So I think it's making intentional decisions. I don't believe in this academic advice that you need to be able to travel wherever to go to do whatever, successful work. There's lots of successful places to work around that have wonderful people at them. And you have the ability to choose which one you be at. And so if that's going to be important to you, choose early so you're already there and prepared, to have that support. And so I made very intentional decisions, and those decisions were prior to the career success. So I enabled my success by making the decisions about the family. And so I think that's really important, that you have to plan, if that's going to be something you need that'll help you succeed, plan for that very early.
Yeah, I would say, Elsa, my experience was similar in that I chose a postdoc that was away so that I could come back where I had been with new experiences to bring something to that faculty that I couldn't have just stayed where I was located. But my husband was in a career that he couldn't move very easily. And my parents and grandparents were there. My grandparents needed help. And so 2 years of slogging it out at a different institution and learning new skills, I bring back something different. And it was very intentional.
And I also
that
think
sort of
that,
thing.
yeah, I do think, and I never left. And so that I have been criticized on grant applications and things like that. However, if you're at a big institution, what I did is just get training in different areas with different experts. And so it is possible to stay as long as you're still learning and growing. So that's the important thing. If you end up staying, in many more women than men make decisions to stay. And I don't think we should be academically penalizing people. But I will tell you, I've gotten comments on that throughout my career that I never left. And you know what? I still have a great career, so I don't care.
Yeah, I work where I got my degrees, right? And somehow I gathered the extra skills I needed. They weren't available at my institution, but they were available close by. I mean, it was a driving short distance, and it was just 2 years. And then you could build the career back where you needed it to be to make it balance with the rest of life. And so we're all going to have paths we take on this front, but don't be afraid to challenge the status quo, because I think that's this notion that you have to do things in a certain way or you can't be successful. I mean, we have examples all sitting here of people who have been successful with actually intentionally trying to strike this balance in a different way. Yeah, and we are actually probably have time for one. Do we have one more question in the chat, Patricia, or shall I go back to the?
I don't think so. We can open. We welcome.
Well, I think we do have a good question here, just maybe that we could ask before we close, and that's about examples of the kinds of boundaries that you've really had to set and how you did it. If you have an example of a boundary that you've had to set in your career, and how you went about actually carrying it out.
I think this sort of relates back to one of that question about meetings and conferences, and I think as the previous panelist said, I think you can't do it all. You have to pick those that mean the most, where you think your career will benefit the most. And so that's been one of the boundaries, is just, needing to be there for certain family events or things like that were just important. And if they have, that was always one of my challenges, is my son's birthday was in the middle of March, and that happened to be a popular time for several dental meetings, the American Association of Dental Research, American Dental Education Association, all having their meetings around the same time. Spring was popular, I guess. And I just had to sort of make some, depending on the year and when those meetings fell, I couldn't do it every year, and so you just have to decide again what's important. And that's a boundary that I've tried to honor.
Yeah. Great.
I'll just add.
Zanjani, please add, yeah.
So I do only do one conference a year, that is GSA, but I made that decision very early on because I found some research that said going to more conferences doesn't increase productivity. So it's very technical in that. But with that said, I use conferences as a way, I use conferences as a way to wean both of my children. So I strategized with my conference meetings and what I'm going to do. And I don't bring my children. I also, like Elsa is, I'm 100% there. No, there's no capacity there, right? So I know my limits at the conference. I know how I can utilize it for my family. And, I utilize that as time my husband can spend with the kids, right? But I think it's intentional. I think we've all said this constantly, like you make the intent that the conference is going to do this for me. It's going to do this for my family. And it's going to be great. Like you look at the benefits and costs and you kind of work with it, but you make it work with you. Like, just like in your work life, you make your position works for you. And I've always said that if the position didn't allow me to have the balance I need, then that probably wasn't the right position for me. And be willing to accept that you move along where you're needed and where the best fit is. I mean, that's the same thing with how when we applied to school, we got into the places with the best fit. I think at a certain point, it's not just about your caliber, it's about where you belong. So I think recognizing the fit there and understanding what you're getting out of something is really, really intentional. The other thing that I do is, even though I will work on the weekends and the evenings, I don't schedule anything work related on weekends or evening unless it's an emergency, like a graduation that can't be moved or something like that. But I try not to schedule evening events and weekend events with colleagues and work, because there's a high likely the balance just gets off. Like I need that time. Also, that's the other thing. I need that. It's a yin and yang. I need that time to be productive in my work. So that's definitely a strategy I use. Not saying that I don't work during that time, but I don't schedule things during that time to rely on that time to get work done. So that's been something I've used throughout.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't either. Weekends and evenings, I just don't schedule, and early mornings before the kids are up. And so you need to tell anybody why you're doing it. I just, I don't fill it out on polls. I'm not available. Eventually, if enough of us will do it, they'll stop asking for meetings at 7:30 in the morning, So I don't really make any, I don't make a big deal about it. I just say, no, I'm not available, and I'm not. And I do the same thing with emails, actually. And this is a little trickier. I mean, I will get on if I know I need to have communication with people, but when I'm with my kids, I don't check my emails. And so I don't have an alert on my phone. I don't respond to you. So people know, my graduate students who need things from me, and close colleagues know they can text me if they need something, but I'm not working, so I'm not looking at my emails, because if you look at your emails, you're immediately working on that stuff and engaged. And that means that your attention is somewhere else. So I follow this policy, like I said before, is I try to be almost 100% wherever I am. So try to have my attention either at home or at work. And I do a lot of work in the evenings, especially now that my kids are teens and they have homework and video games and, FaceTime and stuff like that. They're not paying attention to me so much around then. But, when they were little, I didn't work before they went to bed, basically.
Yeah.
One other thing quickly I just wanted to add is that actually we've talked about the communication with peers and colleagues about home issues and obligations. I think it's also good. My wife and I have felt it's good to talk to our kids too about our work responsibilities and why we might need to go to this meeting and be gone a few days or something like that, so that, because I don't think there's anything wrong with raising kids who also know what hard work looks like, and so that they can hopefully model some of those behaviors as well, and do it in a balanced way.
Yeah.
No, that's a great point. Yeah.
Yes.
And my kids know that if I'm doing something for work, I'm probably not going to engage with them about something that's not an emergency.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I've learned in this conversation that there's a lot to share on this topic, and we definitely need to revisit it. I've enjoyed it a whole lot, and I'm going to let Patricia take us to our closing, because we're at the end of our hour and we have a few things to wrap up. Patricia?
Yes, that's wonderful. And, it's so hard now to think about, let's talk about the pearls. Like, we want our panelists to share with us their overall message, but has been so many messages. So if you could just, in a nutshell, share like your ending pearl of the day today from the standpoint of career balance? Maybe
Well,
Dr. Shuman, yes. go
Yeah,
ahead.
I can, and actually it's good timing because up in the chat is one of the references that I have used. It's a 1996 paper from Annals of Internal Medicine from Molly Carnes, Dr. Molly Carnes in Wisconsin. And in that article, by the way, I would encourage people to take a look. She talks a lot about these issues of traveling for work and work-life balance. One of her comments I've sort of paraphrased into my pearl, which is when you're lying on your deathbed surrounded by loved ones, no one's going to remember whether you got that report or grant application in on time or not.
Yeah.
And so I think we just have to remember that if you look at the long view, you just want to make sure that you put your time where it really was important.
True.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
true. Yeah.
Dr. Strotmeyer, your pearl?
Well, I think you can kind of imagine this from things I've said, but just be unapologetic in how you want to live your life and, make your choices around that. And so I don't really care what anybody else thinks. If I'm going to do what works best for me and my family, and it doesn't matter to me what you think. So try to lose this, need to feel validated by other people who don't really matter that much. So that would be my pearl.
Thank you.
And I'm going to quote a Lehigh University football player, what's sent to me, work hard, play hard. You really need the balance in both. He was an engineering major, so I was wondering how he balanced it. So the idea is be passionate, be there at work, be passionate, be there at home. And if you have passions in both, the balance seems to create itself and you can get over guilt. That's probably one thing I didn't mention is that working at work, make sure you work on things that you're passionate about. It helps you keep going the next day and helps you create that balance of work and life where, family can also draw you in too much and be like, I have a passion project going on. I need to get this done. And then I have a passion project at home that needs to get done. So I think keeping the passion alive really gives you the self-motivation to create balance and keep going. Otherwise, it's just too much and it gets imbalanced.
Beautiful. What a great way to end the session. That's wonderful. Well, being sensitive to time, I would like to ask our brains of this session, Dr. Patricia Slatton, to give us the final words and what's next.
Okay, so as we close our conversation today, we're going to encourage everyone who participated to reflect on your own work-life balance, if we'll agree to call it that, to connect with your mentors and peer colleagues, and to take advantage of some of the tips that were shared by the panelists today, and also some of the resources that we've posted and some of our panelists and participants have posted in the chat, to really spend some time being intentional about how we want to move forward with this. We want to thank our panelists for generously sharing their time, their career experiences, and their perspectives today. Thank you to my co-moderator, Patricia Hine, and all the work group members who've been planning these career conversations. Thanks to you, our participants, for the questions and comments. They added greatly to our conversation today. And a big thank you to Gina Schoen from GSA. She does all the behind the scenes coordination to make these career conversations possible. Thank you, Gina. And we're going to send out a brief survey following this event for you to provide feedback. 3 questions, very brief, just to make sure that we are continuing to develop career conversations that meet the needs of the members. So we appreciate that. And with that, everyone, please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Thanks.
everyone.
Bye. Thank you for all your comments.
Nice to meet
Thank
you guys.
you all.
It was nice meeting you.